I want to introduce our next keynote speaker. This afternoon, Dr. Alistair Gibb is a university professor and an engineer who throughout his life has been involved in a number of remarkable organizations and projects worldwide. He is a chartered engineer and a chartered builder. He has had a successful career in engineering and project management before joining the Loughborough University in 1993. He is a member of the European Construction Institute, or ECI. It's a prestigious pan-European research organization, and he serves as the ECI Royal Academy of Engineering Professor of Complex Project Management at the university. He also conducts and publishes a significant amount of research on construction best practices, particularly in the area of occupational and safety and health. He has led many health and safety research projects funded both by government and industry, and has published research on technical innovation, particularly as it pertains to off-site construction. He is a founding member of the influential UK industry body called Build Off-Site, and has led several overseas trade missions. He recently conducted research on how health and safety are maintained during the construction of the Olympic Park in London, and he is here to share his findings as well as his wisdom. Please welcome Dr. Gibb to the podium. Thank you.
Okay, good afternoon. I'm the guy with the funny accent. There's one or two other Brits I've come across, though, even though their accents have changed a little bit from having been around here. I can't really see you very well, but hopefully you can see me. Glenn, thank you for that. And thank you to Glenn and to Wayne and to Jewel and the other organisers here for this opportunity to come and speak to you this afternoon. It was great to meet Glenn and Wayne. They came to the European Construction Institute's conference in Dusseldorf, and this is the return match. It was good to have their input there, and a number of other CII members as well there, so that was great. But thank you for that. I ought to say a little bit about where I'm from. Loughborough, pronunciation, Loughborough, very strange word, I know, is in the middle of England. You won't have heard of it probably, but you might have heard of Nottingham, where Robin Hood comes from. Well, it's about 15 miles or so away from Nottingham. The university campus there is engineering and sports university. It's the base for Team GB for the Olympics, for instance. We're very proud of our position in terms of the league tables for what they count in civil engineering and construction management. The other thing again that Glenn mentioned was the European Construction Institute, and this was set up, you might even say, in the wake of CII, and we've been very impressed for many years, the work that you've done here in CII. And some of the organisations that are here are also members of ECI. Similar things done slightly differently because Europe's a different marketplace. There are different opportunities, different challenges, but a lot of similarities. A lot of the things I've been hearing already today, certainly strike a chord with us in Europe. Three strands that we're working on there: establishing evidence, disseminating knowledge, and applying practice. And the evidence really is something you're very good at, and I really commend you for the work that you do in research. And we've heard something about those research this afternoon, and will later on as well. Fantastic work, getting academia and industry together in producing things. Again, the situation's a little different in the UK and in Europe about funding, but it's still something that we're pushing forward in terms of supplementing some of the evidence that is already out there. Disseminating knowledge, again, getting that out in terms of publications, in terms of making them available in workshops, in conferences and so forth. And then in the same way as Glenn has talked about the communities of practice, we call them task forces, but similar things, working there in terms of opportunities to really look at what's been produced and make that happen in the real world. And part of that, of course, is applying principles, again, acknowledging the fine work that's been done here with CII, with the principles that you're working to. And I think it was particularly important, Glenn was saying there, that his organisation has appropriated them, has put them into their organisation, sometimes even maybe in a way that only a few people, or not everybody, knows they're from CII, because they become part of the organisation. And usually that's the best way of doing it anyway. But it's exciting to be able to track some of these things back to the work that was done to put them in place. So that's the sales pitch, which Wayne suggested, or did he say that I could do if I didn't take too long in doing it. Back to the topic, safely building London 2012 Olympic Park. On time, on budget, and nobody got killed. You might recognize these places. I might sort of have just put the places up and not the dates and asked you what they were, and most people would say, well, yeah, they're the Olympic venues, and that's the Olympic dates. And they're the number of people we've killed in building the Olympic facilities. That's the official statistics. I'll let you make your own judgment as to which countries may have underreported even the number of fatalities. And it's not always the ones you think about. And of course, London is so far. Opening ceremony is on Friday. I get back on Thursday night. I won't be there. But it's a challenge, and it's a real challenge. Olympics are painted in workers' blood, is the challenge from some disgruntled workers elsewhere. This man at the front there, 254, Sebastian Coe, was the man who led the UK bid, the London bid. He was an 800 metres runner. I used to run the 800 metres. Used to think I was quite good. School level, I was winning races, and I even got to the county champion, 800 metres. Then I went to Loughborough University. And who was at Loughborough University when I was there? Sebastian Coe. So I gave up and concentrated on engineering instead. Not surprisingly. But, you know, Sebastian Coe, you know, imagine the challenge that he's given, okay? Build us an Olympic park. Do it all on time. Of course it's got to be on time, because Friday's Friday, and it's always been Friday. It was always going to start. And there was no opportunity for slippage. Do it all on budget? Well, yeah, there's a limited amount of money and it needs to be spent wisely. Do it all to the right quality. It's got to work. And by the way, don't kill anybody. More than that, let's not cause any harm for anybody either. And a number of organisations, I'm sure some of you here, are talking about zero harm, not just zero accidents. A massive challenge. I think the numbers that were expected to be killed at the London Olympics, based on the man hours and the average in the UK, would be 4. So you imagine saying to someone like Lord Coe, we've got to call him Lord and doff our hats, because we still have that strange situation in the UK. Imagine saying, well, oh, by the way, you're going to kill 4 people. And understandably, he and the other people involved weren't very happy. So there was the challenge of the Olympic Park. And it has been a big project. You can see some of the numbers there, just the amounts of seats that are provided, the new parks, new railway lines, new infrastructure, all the things that are moving on, the residential blocks in the Olympic Village for all the athletes, the media facilities in itself is a massive, massive building. 30,000 workers with a total. 10,000 pages of outline planning application. There's a thing, isn't it? Dear me. Workers as well. Here you have, in terms of a peak workforce of 14,500. 46,000 people working a total number of 77 million hours. A massive undertaking in any situation. And also, you've got to watch. You've got to make sure you keep concentrating. You've had lunch, you see, and you might be sleeping, so you've got to watch. One of the other challenges, this was mentioned already today. I think it was mentioned by Jimmy Hinsey or one of the other people, or was it Dr. Zeus or whatever his name was before. He mentioned there that some of the work they were doing wasn't just working in the more controlled engineering construction sector, but in the rest of the great unwashed, the construction sector as a whole. And of course, the practices and the customs and the culture are very, very different. in these situations. I'm not sure how many of the workers actually wear underwear, such as the first person you saw, but nevertheless, the culture is different. And you can't make the assumptions that you can make on some petrochemical plants or some power plants. And therefore, the challenge is even greater than you might have first thought about. The challenge to actually do things in that way, and by the way, don't kill anybody. In case those of you don't know where the UK is, it's sort of in the middle there somewhere. It's funny, isn't it, how a lot of these maps have the UK in the centre? Maybe that's why we think we're so good, you know? It's all based on hundreds and hundreds of years ago, nothing to do with us now. And there's Europe, of course, and there's the UK, and you know all this. And London, of course, is stuck down at the bottom right-hand corner of the UK. And that's Greater London, and that little bit of squiggle in the red there is where the Olympics is. It's not in the centre of London, it's in the East End. It's in the area that was really next to the Docklands, the area that was bombed very heavily in the Second World War, and an area which really was a very poor area, not just in terms of the people themselves, but more to do with the ground, the sort of buildings that were there. There'd been, as I say, continual development, but very low quality development. A lot of soil problems, a lot of unexploded bombs, for instance, and various other things as well. So a much deprived area that was in need of development. And that was where they had to build the Olympic Park. And some of the buildings, you know, are okay. They're probably not as fancy as some of the buildings elsewhere. This was one on a budget, and it was one on an idea of the legacy and an idea of being perhaps more of a low-key event than some previous events. Apparently, it was partly a sort of move to maybe allow other countries that had less funds to spend on it to do that. But nevertheless, some major buildings, as you might expect, and the parkland and things that were mentioned. So there's the challenge: build as an Olympic Park. Do it on time, do it on budget, do it on quality, and by the way, don't kill anybody. So how have they done it? How have they done so far? What's happened? Well, this was their organisation. They had the ODA. It was a government-driven body that was set up as the client, CLM. The delivery partner, consortium there, and really what happened was they worked together to deliver program sponsorship and program delivery. And in many cases, they were really seen as the client. We would use client, you would use the term owner. And then you had tier ones, the sort of companies that you might recognize the names of, tier twos and tier threes, the people who actually end up doing the work and deliver the project itself, or the projects themselves. And of course, across that, you had a mission to deliver venues, facilities, infrastructure, and transport on time, fit for purpose, in a way that maximizes the delivery of sustainable legacy within the available budget. Cost, time, safety, equalities and inclusion, environment, quality and functionality, and legacy. They were the main headlines. And on this diagram here, I've just suggested the ones in green that say progressive. They're the ones that they felt they were probably pushing the boundaries a little bit more than had been done before. And part of that from the start was the protection and health and safety of everyone involved was paramount. Vision going beyond eliminating illness, injuries and business losses, extending to enhancing the well-being of all involved in our project work. Motherhood and apple pie, it's an expression we use in the UK. I don't know if you do here, but it has that sort of, you're laughing, so either you do or you don't, I'm not sure. But you know, it has that sort of, well, yeah, but that's all fine. They're fine words, but you know, so what? What really does it makes the difference? What is really happening on the ground? Well, some of the things, and this won't be new to most of you, some of the things that were happening there, in particular, the involvement of senior management of the organizations right from the start. The CEOs involved in a CEO forum to be able to make decisions early on. Making those decisions very much early on, before anything had started on site, before even the design had commenced. And then working through below that line to the construction managers and supervisors, working together, collaborating, lots of different organizations, the collaboration to actually pull things through together. The SHELT, the Safety, Health and Environment Leadership Team, was crucial to the success of the approach. And on the health and safety, because that's the focus of my talk, safety, health, well-being, competence and culture. Again, terms that are probably very familiar. Certainly the ones on the left have been around for a long while. When I first joined ECI, we produced a book called The Total Project Management of Construction, Health, Safety and Environment. And then we realized it was a safety manual. And then we thought, actually, we should write something about health. And actually, what about environment? Because, you know, we sometimes use these terms but don't really apply them appropriately. I don't know if this works here. Anyone know who this person is? Maybe it's a UK. I always thought it was an American cartoon, but this is Professor Pat Pending. And the cartoon was called Wacky Races, very popular when I was a boy. But it's the image of this sort of professor doing wacky things, and he had a converter car that changed and never won the race, but was always very entertaining to watch. And the point of that really is to say, well, you know, was this stuff that innovative? Well, no, it wasn't really. You know, it was no great shakes in many ways. It was just doing things well. This is Jason Millett, who's the CEO of the delivery partner, CLM. We've not been an innovator. A lot of what we've done has been down to the execution of tried and tested techniques. So actually, innovation isn't necessarily the main point. And the other thing as well, it was built on some other successes. This is the railway track from London to the Channel Tunnel with people that we love so much. The French on the other side, been fighting them for centuries, and then we'd drill a tunnel to actually draw them together, okay? Well, you know, that was a project, a major project, that was successful in many ways, and there was learning from that was taken forward. And the other one then, Heathrow Terminal 5. A salutary lesson on this, and I'll come to that later on, about not just finishing the building, but finishing the project. We'll perhaps touch on that later. But these major projects then led in, and many of the people who've been working on these other projects moved into London 2012. This is just to show off. Because let's face it, you know, we very rarely win anything anymore. And I'm sorry if you're not keen on cycling. It's now the most popular thing in the UK since the day before yesterday, whenever it was. You know, this is Bradley Wiggins, who won the Tour de France, and then Mark Cavendish, who won the sprint, and Christopher Froome came second in the whole event. So all of a sudden, actually, in fairness, cycling's been quite popular in the UK for a while. But I want to talk briefly about the velodrome. The velodrome. Peculiar shape building. It's shaped like that because of the track. The track goes round in this weird shape, yeah? And apparently, this is supposed to be the fastest track that's ever been built. And the rationale behind that is that the cyclists go faster when they can hear people shouting at them. And the problem is they go faster on the straights, not that there's very much straight, but you know what I mean. And when they go round the banked bit, there's never anybody sitting there, and they slow down. Now, they're going very quickly, so I don't know how they measure this, but they reckon that's the case. So in London, they made the building the same shape so that they could get seats around the back, so that people would be cheering even when they were going around the steep sections, so that everybody would be able to go faster. Proof will be in the pudding, of course. And what that created then was this rather strange shape, and this is not product placement. I am not sponsored by Pringle. I call them crisps, you call them chips. But the shape of it is a Pringle chip, yeah? And that's why it's that particular shape. Well, the issue in point here, and this illustrates a point that I know has been the case in the US, prevention through design, taking decisions early. We have our own set of regulations based on a European directive that have forced us to do that, but also there's some good practice behind it as well. And this was an example of that. This building was designed and was fairly well on in the design. The architect had finished their design and the engineer was working on a steel trussed roof. And they flagged up, as the law requires them, that there was a risk of working at height because of that roof. But hey, you can't build anything without working at height, so it's a risk that we have to deal with, and you just lump it. The contractor will sort that out. However, in those design workshops that were there, the prevention through design workshops, as perhaps you call them here, there were good people brainstorming, getting together, saying, well, what can we do? And they came up with a scheme which was actually a cable net roof that was erected at ground level. Now, they didn't just make that decision based on health and safety, but it was one of the main drivers. It was also more expensive. They'd also done quite a lot of design work on the other one, so it was a risk. They had to take the risk of changing that design on a program where the end was fixed, where they could not allow it to overrun, and make that decision to take an extra, to choose a different way of building. And they did it, and it worked. And the cable net roof was a great success. In the end, because it was quicker to install, it was 6 months quicker to install, and that labour saving balanced the additional cost and the rework that was done. But it was a real challenge, but an example there of where innovative thinking, and this was innovation, or people saying, hang on, do we have to do it this way? Is there a better way? Can really work very well. And particularly the involvement of construction people during the design phase. And I know that's something that is music to the ears of many people who are here. It was a big success for constructability and productivity, and therefore cost, but also safety. And I'm a firm believer in trying to combine buildability or constructability with health and safety reviews. Because if you get constructability right, you probably got health and safety right as well. Some of the other things that they did, again, weren't brand new, but they did these common standards across the whole site. Lots of different organizations and an ad hoc client. But they put out these common standards. They had a problem, they solved the problem, they sent out a note to everyone saying, this is a problem, this is how it's been resolved, let's make sure we do this across the project. They spent time speaking to people who didn't speak English as their first language. You have a challenge here, I know, with language, particularly with a number of people that speak Spanish. Well, you multiply that by 12, that's the situation in London, because we have 12 different languages on most of our construction sites. So therefore, putting things in pictures, which again has been done for some time, but putting them in pictures is a really important part of getting that done. And here's another area which we've neglected a lot in the past. Supervisors, working supervisors, or people who've just stopped working. In other words, the people right involved at the sharp end. And so often in the UK, since more and more people have gone to university, more and more construction managers and project managers are graduates than were 30 years ago. But the people that aren't are the supervisors. And the supervisors seem to be stuck in the middle, and nobody really loves them. And what they did here was they actually had training courses, and they put up a very simple thing. They put up posters saying, these are the graduates. Let's have a picture up there. Let's have something that people can be proud of as a result. Occupational health. So often in our European culture, at least, if you talk about occupational health to a construction worker, they think you're going to tell them not to eat, not to drink. You know, again, there was some of that on the video earlier on, wasn't there, about the assumptions we make about people. But if you can turn that round and say, actually, yeah, we are bothered about your lifestyle, but we really want you to be healthier. We want to be able to help you identify things that you can put right so that you can work longer and work harder and have a better life outside of work as well. So the whole issue there of walk-in service for occupational health and campaigns linked to it. And part of that as well, after all, it is the Olympics, so, you know, stretch and flex. Done all over the world, but not done in the UK very much before. Don't know how much this has happened in the US, but, you know, if our athletes stretch and do all these things before they do something physical, why shouldn't our construction workers? Because they're probably doing more physical things than many athletes are in any case. Sometimes cause a bit of a laugh, of course, in the morning. And reward and recognition, again, you'll be familiar with this. Just finding ways of rewarding and recognizing success. Finding ways of saying, well done, that's a really good thing that you did there. So did everything work swimmingly? Well, lots of it worked swimmingly. You won't read that text, and if I blow it up a little bit, you know, maybe you might. This was from a contract document. And the contract document talked about unexploded bombs in particular. And they'd done lots and lots of work in trying to find out where the unexploded bombs were. And they'd looked at all this documentation, all the rest of it, and then they put this at the end of the contract. Provision of the information below does not obviate the principal contractor, that's the main general contractor, from consulting all original statutory undertakers, local plans and drawings, and any local private services plan, etc., etc., etc. So we'll do all this work, and then we'll still put all the risk on you. Okay? Reminds me of this. This is off the back of a bottle of sparkling water. And what it says at the top in red, cannot guarantee nut-free. You know, where are we? What are we doing? You know, if we're going to do these exercises, then let's actually follow them through. So there were some issues there about this sort of risk and who takes the risk and so forth. Now, in time-honoured fashion, certainly if CII is anything to go by, it wasn't just a question of what they did. There was research involved in there as far as our work was concerned. And there were a number of projects, not just involving teams from Loughborough and the European Construction Institute, but these were the legacy research on health and safety that was done. These were the areas that were done. We were involved in 2 of them. This was funded by a charity, which also is the membership organisation for health and safety professionals. And this one was funded directly by the government through the Health and Safety Executive. So quite briefly, the communication project, we were looking at both the impact and the efficacy of the health and safety initiatives, and how did they work, and how were they communicated? What were the processes? What was the impact? What can we learn from it? And in particular, what can we learn about passing on outside of London 2012? We had observations, we had interviews with workers and managers, we ran focus groups, we looked at documentation, the sort of thing that you would expect to happen. And of course, not surprisingly, we found that there was a sort of a plan, do, assure, and then improve sort of cycle. But of course, what we all knew, but no one had really pinpointed before, is that's all well and good in the big organisations, but of course that then happens in the smaller organisations, the tier 2s and the tier 3s, and the individuals on site if things are working. And that communication between them sometimes created some of the problems and some of the challenges. The main things, the main key performance indicators on communication: people. I've heard that a dozen times already today. The client, the owner, their commitment, engagement, communication itself, and the art of communication, behaviour, and the behaviour not just of the workers but of everyone involved, planning and organising and reviewing and learning. Now, the second project was even more interesting, to me at least. We were approached after all the other work had been done, all the other research had been done, and they said, look, we really want to know what happened, what was happening underneath. What was the preconditioning? You know, not just what systems were there, but what was really making a difference. Because we think we've done these systems before, but they haven't quite been so successful. What can we do? What can we learn? And therefore, we carried out this human and organisational factors research study looking at the construction of the London 2012 Olympic Park. And we were trying to identify the why rather than the how, the underpinning human and organisational interactions. And therefore, although it was focused on health and safety, actually it's far more to do with management in general rather than just health and safety. This is a man called Howard Shipley. He's the construction director of the client of the owner, the Olympic Delivery Authority. And he believes that what came out of this was significant, and he believes that the soft individual and organisational issues can transform the construction industry. And we were very pleased with his response there. And again, the words that are here, these were the findings, and you'll say, well, hey, you know, what's this guy talking about? We know all about this. We've been saying this for ages, and you know, if you have, then good on you, that's great. But these are the things that we found really made the difference in reality. Respectful, fundamentally respecting individual and corporate roles, recognising mutual reliance and the right to respect in terms of conditions and personal interactions. Respect for everyone all the way through the process. Trusting, putting faith in other parties, other organisations, and there was a lot of interface there between different organisations. A commitment and delivery, fueling the ability to collaborate effectively. Empowering parties and individuals to work to their best effect, to do with their knowledge and skills. Providing motivation and encouraging innovation. Motivational. I like this bit that I've underlined there. Achieving more than they think they can. Helping people achieve more than they think they can. Organisations as well. Some of the organisations came into this as specialists and had no idea at all what it was like to work on a major project. And inspiring and motivating them to achieve more than they think they can. To be fair, to be equitable, recognising good performance, but also acknowledging where performance isn't good and where people have not done the right thing and doing something about it, not just being one-sided. Being consistent, relentless in focusing on priority objectives, alignment through the supply chain right the way down. And in the UK, that doesn't happen very often. In the UK, the owner talks to the tier ones, and the tier ones tell the owner what the owner wants to know, and then carry on business as usual. So right the way through the supply chain is essential. Being clear, the clarity, both in planning, risk management and delivery, transparency in communication and shared commitment to objectives. Being preemptive, thinking early. Again, Wayne mentioned this earlier on, didn't he? That sort of, up front, the front end work that needs to be done. But also preemptive all the way along. Right the way through, they had what they call it, I think it was a review 6 weeks and 6 months, all the way through. What you're going to do in 6 weeks' time, what you're going to do in 6 months' time, all the way through. And they had to keep thinking ahead, the contractors and the designers. What's going to happen in 6 weeks, what's going to happen in 6 months? And that rolling front then meant that they didn't get hit with things that they weren't expecting. Challenging as well, being challenging in the way that you manage, encouraging an openness to ideas throughout the supply chain. Being collaborative as well, that there's resources about alignment, working constructively, sharing expertise and understanding. Being communicative, that tied in with the other work we did, but it came out in this as well. And you can see across the bottom there a model called the CHIP model that looks at the receiver. This works for individuals as well as for organizations. The receiver's in the middle, attention, comprehension, attitudes, beliefs and motivation. The source and the channel, which is what we often concentrate on, but what's happening in the receiver? What's the situation there? What are they thinking about? What's going on in their minds, so that it will affect their behavior, not just what you've told them to do. Being open, sharing information, avoiding unwarranted suspicions, encouraging trust. Again, overlap in that. Being assured as well, and having the mechanisms and the people involved in order to provide confidence in delivery and prioritizing actions. So there they are. And it's not rocket science. They're things that we all know about. And yet they were the things that we found. When we dug underneath, they were the things that were happening. And they were happening consistently. They were happening because they were good people with good processes. But we shouldn't take them for granted. Even though we've been talking about them for a long while, we can't afford to take them for granted. So far, so good. 2 or 3 days left. I'll tell you about that in a minute. Completed, yes, it was completed. Bear in mind the construction was completed quite some time ago. The work that's been going on recently has been a bit of planting and a bit of work around the edges. But the construction itself was always planned to be done in advance, and that has worked exceptionally well. Nobody died. The accident frequency record was significantly less than the UK construction average. And that was with a type of project which had all the chances of going wrong, working with people that did not have the culture, working in a situation where they didn't have that track record, and therefore a real challenge and a real tribute to the people involved to do that. Not everything's gone swimmingly though, but I'm quite pleased with this. Usually what happens in construction is that we get blamed for all sorts of things. I said I'd come back to Heathrow Terminal 5. Some of you might know about that if you travel, and it was a disaster. Day one it opened and everything went wrong. So in most people's mind, those people who travel, Heathrow Terminal 5 was a disaster. But it was a fantastic success from construction. But of course projects aren't just construction. It's delivering the whole thing. And they failed to deliver the whole thing. And in some ways, some of the things that have gone pear-shaped on the London 2012 have been those other things. You may have picked it up here. I'm sure CNN has made quite a lot of it. We've had a problem with security guards. G4S, the private company, couldn't provide enough security guards. All of a sudden, we have the army and the police and all these sort of things. And it will be solved, it'll work, and everyone will be happy, I suppose, at the end. But, those things go, and our media tends to sort of focus on them. But the good thing, at least in this article here, is they're saying, well, that wasn't, this particular overspend, which was also to do with security, wasn't to do with construction. But of course, the important thing from my perspective was this article, and it's to do with the health and safety. The construction has even broken a world record. People have died building every other stadium in the modern history of the Olympics. The safety record of this project is equivalent to working in an office. And we've heard that a number of times today, certainly those that were in the session on the research on leading indicators. That's a win worth celebrating. But it wasn't done at the expense of all the other project parameters. It was done along with them. And the success, therefore, is down to a total management approach across the whole. Build Olympic Park, do it all on time, do it all on budget, do it all to quality. And by the way, don't kill anybody. Thank you very much for your time. I believe we have time for some questions, and there are microphones, because I'm hard of hearing. Am I stopping people having coffee? There's one, look.
Alistair, how are you?
Thank you, Wayne.
Great presentation, thanks. Why don't you tell these people how to join the European Construction Institute?
Pay me lots of money. No, thank you, Wayne. Yeah, you know, if you've got operations in Europe and you're interested, then have a word with me. By all means, that would be great. An organisation similar to yourselves, it's quite a lot smaller. The fees are a little bit less, but you know, you would join in a similar way than you would with CII. I'd also though like to pick up one thing that Wayne, not Wayne said, that Glenn said earlier on. What you get in is what you get out. And if you want to join, just the same as been said here, if you want to join, then join for the right reasons, and join because you want to get engaged and get involved in those things. And that's the same message as is here as well. So have a word with me afterwards. And even if you don't want to join, but you just want to find out what's happening, then you know, have a word with me, because part of the reason for me being here and Wayne being in Dusseldorf was to try and improve the relationships between us so that we can really work together on as many areas as we can. There's one over there.
Okay, thank you for the presentation. It's really interesting. Well, the question, I'm Ibrahim Sukaram from Aramco Services Company. Compared to the other Olympics events and what they built, was there a strategy to understand how complex is the stadium so you make sure that you don't have any uncertainty related to safety?
That's a very good point. There was a definite intention to design simpler structures, not just for health and safety, to be honest, but partly because it was almost on that basis that London won the bid in the first place. In other words, it was a scale down in terms of the complexity or the, let's say, the wow factor. I mean, there's no doubt that Olympics in the past have produced some phenomenally good buildings, most of which are now empty. So the challenge was not necessarily to concentrate on the wow, but to concentrate on things that work, and the proof of the pudding's in the eating, whether it does or not, but then also on the legacy. So it wasn't specifically health and safety.
Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. I would say, though, while someone else is thinking, though, I think sometimes designers amongst us do try and do things complex because, you know, we think we can do it. And that's not necessarily a bad thing, but it doesn't always help later on. Let's try and find easy ways of doing things. I was at a nuclear power station fairly recently, and there were some phenomenally complicated supports for ductwork. And I just couldn't really work out what they were all about. Someone had obviously sort of almost done a PhD working out how to support this ductwork. There's one in the middle here.
Are there plans after the Olympics to convert the facilities to utilize them in a positive way?
Yeah. Yes, there are. Again, because of the comment I made before that many of the Olympics venues have not been very successful at doing that. There's been an ongoing controversy with regards to the main stadium. And the problem for those soccer fans amongst you is that by a long way, soccer, or football as we would call it, is the biggest game in the UK and in Europe and probably across the rest of the world except here. But you know, if you're going to watch football, if you're going to watch soccer, you've got to be close to the action, because that's the way stadia are made. And a stadia that's got a running track into which the pitch would fit is a problem. And that's still been the debate about the main stadium. And the Olympic team did say we would guarantee there would still be an athletics stadium as a result of this, which was probably a little bit naive. But there are ongoing situations there. A number of the other venues are actually temporary. For instance, you'll perhaps look, when you look on the television next week, the swimming venue is a very strange building, and it's got two great sort of things stuck out the side. Well, that is temporary seating that is significantly more than is needed in the long term. There is a need for a swimming pool which can hold events, but not for the Olympic capacity. The cycle track will probably be fine because cycling is becoming very popular. The basketball is in a temporary building, sort of semi-permanent, but will be moved. So there's certainly been thought put into it. We need to come back in 5 or 10 years' time to see how effective it's been. Thank you.
Yeah, you talked about the accomplishments from a fatality perspective. I'm curious on how far down the safety pyramid did the organization operate, and where would you say that the craft, the individuals doing the work, lived and breathed? And by that, I'm talking like first aids, behaviors, that kind of.
Yeah. I mean, the way it was driven, and this would not necessarily be the norm in the UK. The way it was driven was that that culture, as far as it could be established, was driven right the way down to the people banging nails and screwing screws. So therefore, the measures, and again, as we heard in some of the previous talks about toolbox talks and orientation and so forth, was all about the actual craft workers and the general labourers. Now, in terms of achievement in lagging indicators, then that was really quite impressive. Having been involved in it, and having been involved in many other construction projects in the past, I think they did quite a good job on the behaviour and on the cultural aspects as well. We still haven't worked out good ways of measuring that in any meaningful way in terms of the success of that. But in particular, we spoke to some of the organisations that were new to that type of thing, and they came away with all sorts of ideas, and we've tracked them on other projects, and they're trying to implement some of those other ideas on other projects, which is fantastic, because if the legacy is going to work, it needs to be spread. And the other thing we're doing is that we are applying at the moment for some funding from the government. So if you can all write a letter to the Prime Minister saying you'd like to support this, that would be very helpful. To apply the learning from this to the nuclear new build, which is the next big sort of multi-headed effort that we're probably going to have in the UK. Very important question though, and we need to make sure we keep concentrating on the people that are getting hurt.
Hello,
One
Alistair.
more. Hi.
Hi. I was wondering if you could describe a little bit, for those that don't know, about the CDM regulations in the UK.
Yep.
And
How long you got?
Connected to that, what were some of the challenges you faced with the constructability reviews with the Tier 2, Tier 3,
Okay.
Tier 4 contractors?
Yeah.
Thank you.
We probably need a longer conversation about this in due course, but in summary, Europe has a directive called the Temporary and Mobile Construction Sites Directive, which simplistically speaking says you must think about construction, maintenance and demolition during design. That's what it really means, okay? And every country in Europe has to implement that in their own legislation. We've done that in the UK with something called the Construction Design and Management Regulations, and where they've been applied by good teams, they've worked very well. Where they've been applied by bad teams, they've been very bureaucratic and produced a lot of paper and not a lot of benefit, because that's the way things are, I'm afraid. Now, what they really mean is that the architects and engineers are forced by law to consider construction and to consider maintenance and consider demolition. So what that means is, the example I gave you on the velodrome was they had to have a workshop to discuss construction. They didn't have to change their design, because they could have still argued the other one was okay, even if it was riskier, because it's a balance. But they had to have the process. So the process exists. And that's probably where we're different to the situation that you have here. In terms of involvement down through the supply chain, a lot depends on the size. Some of the Tier 2s were very big organizations supplying specialist kit and they were, you know, very much geared up to being involved in that whole prevention through design process. Others were not, and we have a similar problem perhaps that you do as well. You know, it's not just a question of getting a designer and a constructor together and saying sort it out, because a lot of designers don't know construction, a lot of construction people don't know design, and you need the right people who can really think and put themselves in the place of the other person in order to come up with good solutions. So generally successful. I'm a great supporter of it, and I've been working with teams here looking at prevention through design, but it's not the panacea for everything. I think we're out of time. Okay, thank you very much.